Hello and welcome to the KBC Economy Talks, a series of conversations where we look at the Irish and global economy. I'm Lourda Sexton and I'm joined by KBC's Chief Economist, Hughes. We've seen consumer sentiment come in for this month and it's dropped for the fourth consecutive month. Now, obviously, there are a lot of concerns out there with people's consumer confidence when we look at things like the rising cost of living and a lot of talk out there about global recession. Is this 4-month drop unusual?
It is. I think it's not surprising that consumers are feeling worse off this month, but it is significant. We've only had 4 occasions in the past 26 years when Irish consumers felt worse for 4 months in a row. And those were when the dot-com bubble collapsed, when the financial crisis hit, when we started to find out how much the banking crisis was going to cost the Irish economy, and finally, when the risk of a no deal Brexit seemed to crystallize in the summer of 2019. So they're all times when consumers feel, oops, the world looks very different now. And I think that's really behind the fall that we're seeing. You know, for the last while, people have worried about the cost of living. Was the increase likely temporary? There's been more sense that these are things that are going to remain with us for some time. The higher energy costs, a very obvious one, but generalized increases in living costs, particularly in areas like food prices. And more recently, consumers have started to hear about the threat of imminent interest rate increases. So rushing out of the pandemic, consumers hoped that's the worst over. Everything is going to be fine now. And in the last few months, they've discovered it could get a lot worse.
Absolutely, absolutely. There are a lot of worries still out there. Now, in more positive news, Austin, we got the jobs report in for the first quarter of this year, and we've seen that the Irish job market has really improved significantly. And actually, we're ahead of many other countries when it comes to the recovery post-pandemic. Can you talk us through those findings?
Sure, it's worth maybe emphasizing that consumer sentiment is down, but not entirely out. Irish consumer sentiment in May was at a 19-month low, but if you look across the water in the UK, it was at a 38-year low. So Irish consumers are probably picking up other elements of positivity, and the most significant aspect there is the jobs market. We've seen very strong increases in employment in recent quarters to the point now that there's roughly 160,000 more people at work in the Irish economy than there was when the pandemic struck. That's extraordinary. You know, that's so much ahead of what we're seeing in most other economies. In the euro area, employment is just marginally more positive. Even in the US, there's still a very significant hemorrhage of jobs. And in the UK, there are fewer people working now than 2 years ago. So all in all, the Irish economy continues to be this lean green jobs machine. And it's very interesting to note that, you know, it's encouraging to see it's around all age groups, particularly pronounced pickup in female labor force participation. So, and this is a very encouraging long-term trend that perhaps more women are entering the workforce. It may well be that the capacity to work from home during COVID has been an issue there. So that's a positive dimension. And it's also worth noting that the growth in employment outside Dublin has been marginally faster than in the capital. So most regions seen improvement, but border counties, the Midlands seeing the strongest increases. And again, that may have something to do with working from home. So all in all, really, really positive news on the Irish economy. And it is a significant offset to the gloom that consumers are hearing about and that's weighing on confidence at the moment.
Absolutely, it really is. And it's great to see that as well. Now, Austin, we always talk about house prices here, and I guess today is going to be no different. When you look at house prices, we've seen in March, the latest figures that we have, that house prices grown at the fastest rate that we've seen in 7 years. Now, you did an analysis on this, and you talked about the fact that you've seen tentative signs of easing there when you look at cost pressures and maybe marginal sales. But when we look at things like the cost of living and looming ECB interest rates that you mentioned earlier, do you see things like this impacting on demand as we go ahead, I suppose, later this year?
I think we will see some slowdown in demand growth. First of all, the fact that house prices have become so much more expensive means they're less affordable for many. So we have this problem now that house prices are increasingly moving out of the reach of many would-be buyers, and affordability constraints are going to worsen because of the likelihood of higher interest rates as soon as July. So we're going to see borrowing costs increase through the second half of the year. We've a lot more uncertainty about the economic outlook in spite of the strong job numbers. So those elements will tend to slow things down. I think also, as I said in the jobs numbers, we've seen this dramatic pickup in employment outside Dublin. And you're also seeing that in house prices outside the capital. Again, there may be issues around affordability in some of these areas, particularly in the border regions and that. And it may also encourage some new supply in this area. So I would hope we see some new supply and that we also see maybe some slight slowing of demand. So it's not that we're looking at a crash in house prices. I think you'll continue to see strength in house prices because of the strength of the economy, but hopefully they will start growing at a rate that is more sustainable and that makes them a little more affordable for people who hopefully are going to see some rise in their incomes.
I'm sure there'll be a lot of people happy to hear that. And as always, Austin, thank you very much for your analysis. And if you want to read any more of Austin's analysis, you can do so on kbc.ie/blog. Thanks, Austin.
Thanks, Lourda.